The young and the restless spoilers in the dim light of a scarcely furnished room, where shadows danced on cold, unyielding walls, a macabre scene unfolded. Phyllis lay slumped on a rickety cot, her body racked with pain and the relentless grip of impending death. Each ragged breath she took was a desperate plea for life, a silent scream against the inexorable pull of fate. As Phyllis battled the slow decay of her strength, her mind drifted between the clarity of hope and the fog of despair, questioning whether fate had already sealed her destiny. In stark contrast, just a few feet away, Sharon maintained a disturbing calm. Her eyes, though filled with an intensity that belied her inner turmoil, betrayed nothing of the chaos swirling within. While Phyllis grappled with the possibility of her final moments, Sharon's composure was almost unnerving, a calm in the eye of the storm, as if she were a puppeteer orchestrating events from behind the curtain of apparent serenity. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to choke anyone who might have wandered in. The two women were bound together not by kinship or love but by the twisted machinations of a sinister plot. Sharon had devised a plan, one that danced on the razor's edge between salvation and doom. Her suggestion came unexpectedly, a cold and calculated intervention amid the swirling uncertainty. "Phyllis, you must drink from this bottle." The vial in question was no ordinary container, it was marked with a strange, almost otherworldly label that hinted at secrets beyond comprehension. According to Sharon, this bottle contained what could only be described as an antidote, a concoction carefully prepared beforehand to reverse the effects of a potent poison. Phyllis, however, was not ready to trust in the uncertain promise of salvation. "But what if it's still poison?" she murmured weakly, her voice tinged with both skepticism and fear. "If it continues to be poison, I will die. Please, let's just stop this madness." Her words resonated with a raw, unfiltered desperation. She knew that if the antidote was nothing but another dose of toxic venom, her fate would be sealed far too swiftly. The idea of an early demise was unbearable, and her inner will to survive burned fiercely despite the overwhelming odds. Time, it seemed, had become a capricious ally and an indifferent enemy simultaneously. With her strength waning and her consciousness gradually slipping away, Phyllis became increasingly disoriented. The room spun around her, and the once crisp outlines of reality blurred into a surreal haze. In this desperate moment, Sharon's hand moved with an unsettling resolve. Despite the simmering debate between caution and hope, Sharon had decided. With a firm grip and a resolve that bordered on ruthlessness, she tilted the bottle, pouring its contents directly into Phyllis's mouth. The act was swift, almost clinical, yet fraught with layers of emotional complexity. For Sharon, it was a calculated risk, a final gamble where every heartbeat was suspended in anticipation. The outcome of this dramatic intervention now rested solely on the fickle hand of fate. Every second stretched into an eternity as both women awaited the consequences of Sharon's decision. Just as the silence of uncertainty began to weigh heavily upon the room, a piercing alarm shattered the stillness. The mechanical wail of the siren sliced through the tension, drawing attention to the unfolding drama. In the background, voices could be heard, disembodied cheers of approval emanating from those who had orchestrated this intricate plot. One of the kidnappers, his voice laced with triumph, proclaimed that Sharon had succeeded in her mission. According to him, the antidote had done its work. Phyllis had ingested the life-saving potion and would, against all odds, continue to live. Sharon, though outwardly relieved, was anything but untroubled by this turn of events. Her relief was tempered by an undercurrent of fear, a fear not just for Phyllis, but for herself. In her mind, the notion of coexisting with the prospect of a lifeless body, a symbol of death that might have once been Phyllis, was too harrowing to accept. The thought of living with the constant reminder of that fateful moment, with the memory of a near-death experience so raw and real, was something she dreaded. Sharon silently thanked her deity, expressing a private prayer of gratitude for the unexpected reprieve. Yet, beneath her gratitude lay a seething apprehension. If Phyllis had not survived, if her body were to become an inescapable relic in that claustrophobic room, Sharon would be forced to live with the horrifying specter of death, a constant companion that would erode her sanity over time. The psychological torment of that scenario was almost as unbearable as the physical agony that Phyllis had endured. For Sharon, the room was no longer just a setting for a rescue, it was a battleground of moral dilemmas and existential fears. Every creak of the old floorboards, every flicker of the failing light, became a reminder of the razor-thin line between life and death, and of the profound consequences of the choices she had made. The very air they breathed seemed charged with the electricity of impending judgment. In the ensuing moments, as the alarm continued its relentless cry, the gravity of the situation settled in with a cold finality. Both women, bound together by fate and circumstance, were caught in a web of decisions that had been spun long before this moment. Phyllis, now teetering on the brink of recovery, was a living testament to the precarious nature of existence, while Sharon embodied the duality of human resolve, the capacity to act decisively even when every instinct screamed in protest. The room itself, with its peeling walls and battered furnishings, bore silent witness to the unfolding drama. It was a setting where the lines between heroism and villainy, hope and despair, blurred into indistinguishable shades of gray. The strange label on the bottle, the chilling applause of the conspirators, and the desperate conversation between the two women all coalesced into a narrative of survival against overwhelming odds. As the minutes ticked by, the initial shock began to give way to a cautious optimism. Medical personnel, alerted by the piercing alarm and the chaotic series of events, rushed into the scene. Their faces were etched with concern as they worked frantically to stabilize Phyllis, whose pulse was now a symbol of both fragility and resilience. In the midst of this clinical chaos, Sharon's mind raced, haunted by the echoes of her own doubts and the relentless question of what might have been if the bottle had contained nothing but death. In a twist of fate that underscored the unpredictable nature of their lives, Phyllis began to show subtle signs of recovery. Her eyes fluttered open, and though her gaze was distant and unfocused, it carried a glimmer of hope, a fragile light in the overwhelming darkness. This moment, however, was bittersweet for Sharon. While relief washed over her, the haunting possibility of failure, of a future marred by the constant presence of a lifeless body, lingered like a shadow at the edge of her thoughts. Sharon's inner monologue was a turbulent mix of relief, guilt, and existential dread. The success of the antidote was not merely a victory over poison, it was a victory over the very embodiment of fate's cruelty. Yet, it came at the cost of a decision that had forced her to become both savior and executioner. Every heartbeat was now a reminder that life was fragile, that each moment teetered on the edge of oblivion, and that the choices made in the dim light of desperation could haunt one for a lifetime. In the end, the narrative of that fateful night became more than a story of survival. It transformed into a meditation on the fine line between hope and despair, between life and death. The room, the bottle with its enigmatic label, and the interplay of desperate choices all converged into a tableau that captured the essence of human frailty. It was a stark reminder that even in the darkest moments, when the world seemed poised to crumble, the spark of life could still flicker, defiant against the encroaching night. Thus, as the echo of the alarm faded and the room settled into an uneasy quiet, both Phyllis and Sharon were left to confront the aftermath of that critical juncture. The immediate danger had passed, but the psychological scars and the moral ambiguities of their actions would linger long after the physical wounds had healed. And in that fragile state between recovery and ruin, the true nature of their intertwined fates was revealed, a reminder that sometimes, the line between salvation and damnation is drawn not by destiny, but by the choices we make in the blink of an eye. In the suffocating darkness of the abandoned warehouse, an unmodified voice suddenly cut through the oppressive silence, a voice that Phyllis knew all too well. It was raw and unmistakable, reverberating against the cold concrete walls. As if jolted awake by a hidden alarm, Phyllis's eyes fluttered open, her heart pounding like a frantic drumbeat in the quiet chamber. "Is that you, Alan? Show yourself, why did you kidnap me?" she demanded in a trembling tone, each word laced with a mix of fear, betrayal, and desperate hope. The question hung in the air, mingling with the echo of her own anxiety, as she strained her ears for the familiar timbre of a voice that once promised protection and camaraderie. In that charged moment, the kidnapper, who had been lurking in the shadows, his presence masked by a digital alteration meant to obscure his identity, responded. But instead of the reassuring tone of Alan that Phyllis expected, the voice that answered was cold and detached, announcing an entirely different name. "I am Aristotle Dumas," the intruder stated, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. The name was so foreign, so utterly out of place, that it caused a ripple of astonishment to pass through Phyllis's clouded mind. Neither she nor anyone in her immediate circle had ever encountered the name Aristotle Dumas. It was as if the very fabric of her memories had been tampered with, and now, this new identity threatened to unravel everything she once believed to be true. Phyllis's eyes narrowed as she recalled countless nights in Paris, a city that had seen both her greatest hopes and deepest despairs. In the winding alleys of that metropolis, she had often heard that unmistakable voice, Alan's voice, so full of character and inscrutable secrets. "No," she insisted, her voice gaining strength despite her weakened state, "you're not Aristotle Dumas. It's Alan, you damn scoundrel, and I've heard that voice too many times in Paris." The stark realization rippled through the room. The carefully constructed facade had begun to crumble. In his haste, the kidnapper had forgotten to engage his voice modulation software, a technological safeguard designed to obscure his true identity. The oversight was fatal in a world where every detail was crucial. Aristotle Dumas's disguise was no longer complete, and his real persona was, inadvertently, laid bare before a woman who was more perceptive than he had ever given him credit for. For a long moment, silence reigned once more, punctuated only by the distant hum of machinery and the erratic pulse of Phyllis's heart. The revelation was profound. Not only had he mistaken himself for a savior or a tormentor in her eyes, but his very identity had been unmasked by his own neglect. Yet, as the tension built in the stifling air of the room, an unsettling thought crept into the kidnapper's mind. Was fear even warranted now? A sardonic smile flickered across his face as he allowed a bitter chuckle to escape his lips. "Fear," he mused aloud, his tone a mixture of disbelief and dark amusement. "There is no room for fear here. Only the relentless pursuit of control." His eyes, glinting with a dangerous mix of confidence and madness, scanned the room. Every detail of his predicament was now laid out before him, the revelation of his true voice, the fracture in the carefully constructed narrative he had intended to weave, and the unyielding determination of Phyllis to confront him. Phyllis, struggling against the shackles of her confinement, felt a surge of defiance course through her veins. The betrayal, the ambiguity of her circumstances, and the stark dissonance between what she had believed and what now lay bare before her all ignited a rebellious spark within her. "I won't let you hide behind false names and twisted lies any longer, Alan," she declared, her voice steady and resolute, even as her body trembled with the remnants of weakness. "You thought you could control the narrative by distorting your identity. But now, the truth is staring you in the face." The warehouse seemed to pulse with a palpable tension, as if the very walls were complicit in the unfolding drama. Dust motes danced in the dim beams of light that managed to penetrate the gloom, each one a silent witness to the collision of past loyalties and present deceptions. In the cacophony of emotions that surged within her, Phyllis felt a strange amalgamation of relief and anger, a bittersweet acknowledgement that the man who had once offered her solace was now an enigma, a phantom of betrayal. Alan, if that was indeed who he was, stood there, a figure shrouded in contradictions. His voice, unmasked by the failure of the modulating software, betrayed more than he intended. It hinted at a past steeped in secret rendezvous, clandestine missions, and the heavy burden of choices made in the shadowed corridors of power. Yet, for all the mysteries that clung to him like a second skin, there was one undeniable truth: he had once been someone she trusted, someone whose presence had always evoked a sense of both dread and longing. Caught in a vortex of emotions, the kidnapper's mind raced through the possibilities. The plan had been meticulous, the deception intricate. He had assumed the alias of Aristotle Dumas to weave a web of confusion and subterfuge, a strategy meant to disorient and terrify his captive. But now, with his real voice piercing through the pretense, he found himself exposed, his carefully masked intentions undone in an instant. "I suppose fate has a wicked sense of humor," he remarked, his tone shifting from cold calculation to a more introspective melancholy. "You always did have a knack for unmasking the truth, Phyllis." His words, laced with a hint of regret, hung heavily in the air, as if acknowledging that the line between enemy and ally was far more blurred than either of them cared to admit. Phyllis's gaze never wavered as she confronted him. "Do not try to sweet-talk your way out of this, Alan. I know your games, your secrets, and the lies you've fed me. You thought I wouldn't recognize the familiar cadence of your voice, the memories of our time in Paris. But the truth is, I see right through your charade." A pause stretched between them, a silent battleground where past memories clashed with the present betrayal. In that moment, the warehouse became more than just a prison. It transformed into a stage upon which their intertwined histories were laid bare. Each word exchanged was a step back into a labyrinth of shared moments, of promises made and broken, of danger and desire intermingled in a dance as old as time. The kidnapper, now visibly unsettled by the force of Phyllis's conviction, struggled to regain his composure. The weight of his deception pressed upon him, a reminder that every lie eventually finds its reckoning. "Perhaps," he conceded with a bitter sigh, "I underestimated you, Phyllis. Perhaps I underestimated the power of truth." His eyes, now flickering with a mixture of admiration and sorrow, searched hers for any sign of forgiveness, a hope as fragile as the trust they once shared. Yet, forgiveness was a luxury neither of them could afford in that moment. The air was charged with the electric tension of imminent decisions, of paths that would irrevocably alter the course of their lives. Outside the confines of that cold, oppressive room, the world continued to churn, oblivious to the drama unfolding within its hidden recesses. But inside, every second stretched into an eternity, as the past and present collided with a force that threatened to shatter the delicate balance between redemption and retribution. Phyllis's voice, though weary, resonated with a newfound determination. "If you are truly Alan, then prove it. There's more at stake here than just our twisted history. Show me that there's still something worth fighting for, something beyond this tangled web of deception and cruelty." Her challenge was not merely a demand for proof of identity, but a plea for the restoration of a connection that had been buried under layers of betrayal and subterfuge. The man before her, once a guardian, now an antagonist in a game of shadows, hesitated. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his response. In that fleeting moment, the truth of his nature lay bare, the conflict between the man he had become and the remnants of who he once was. His silence was a confession in itself, a silent admission that the past could neither be erased nor fully embraced. Finally, with a heavy heart and a voice that carried the weight of years filled with both regret and resolve, he spoke. "I never meant to hurt you, Phyllis. But there are forces at play here far beyond our control, forces that compel us to make choices that haunt us long after the moment has passed." His words, laden with a tragic inevitability, hinted at a world where loyalty was fleeting and the cost of truth was often measured in shattered dreams. In that desolate warehouse, amidst the interplay of light and shadow, the identities of Alan and Aristotle Dumas merged into a single, painful reality. Phyllis and the man before her were bound by a shared history, a tapestry woven from threads of trust, deception, and an unyielding desire for redemption. And as the echoes of their confrontation faded into the night, one thing became abundantly clear: the path forward would be fraught with danger, heartache, and the unrelenting challenge of confronting the demons that lurked in every whispered lie and every forgotten promise. Thus, in the charged silence that followed, the narrative of their lives took an irrevocable turn. With their identities exposed and their fates interlaced in ways neither could have foreseen, Phyllis and Alan stood on the precipice of a new chapter, a chapter where the only certainty was that the truth, once unveiled, had the power to either heal or destroy. And in that fragile moment between revelation and consequence, the haunting refrain of their shared past echoed, a reminder that in the game of life and betrayal, every secret eventually finds its voice.